panel of our workshop, of our conference, is dedicated to a workshop on Saint Gerard of Chenard. And we will invite Boris Stoikovsky, Dorel Mikle, to give their presentations. I will give a presentation here as well. Mr. Van Nainyadu is not here, so we have an email these days that he might not arrive. So we have 3 presentations on Saint Gerard of Chenard. Thank you, Victoria. The next panel is here. Right. So if you can join us if you want, or just take a coffee break. Okay, please, Boris. Boris Stoikovsky comes from the Novi Sad University, right? And he will speak about one English overview on Saint Gerard of Chenard, Butler Sides, and Saint Gerard. Do you have no, you just okay.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let us express our gratitude to the organizers for accepting our paper, and to greet you all on behalf of the University of Novi Sad, Faculty of Philosophy, Department of History, and the Center for Historical Researches. It is also a very great honor to speak first today after this very interesting presentation of our colleague Victoria. So, what brought us all today is an attempt to provide an overview of the reception of the cult of Saint Gerard. We have decided to present one interesting kind of reception of the saint from Chenard in the eyes of one of the most prominent English Roman Catholic priests and scholars who had lived in the very turbulent 18th century. That was Alban Butler. He is the author of very famous lives of the fathers, martyrs, and other principal saints, well known as Butler's Lives. This presentation will, after a brief introduction, try to give an overview of the way how Butler has presented Saint Gerard in his work, which were his sources, and especially did he, and how, or in what way he actually did, the later compilers and the editors of Butler's work changed the way the Saint Gerard was depicted in this very famous hagiographic work. After the so-called Glorious Revolution, the early 18th century were in some respects the depths of despair for Roman Catholicism in England. Although the persecution was not violent as in the past, Catholic number, influence, and visibility in English society reached their lowest ebb. Their civil rights were severely curtailed, their right to own property or inherit land was greatly limited, they were burdened with special taxes, they could not send their children abroad for Catholic education, they could not vote, and priests were liable for imprisonment. There was no longer, as one in Stuart times, any notable Catholic presence at court, public life, or military professions. Many of the Catholic nobles and gentry were preserved on their land and on their tenants. Small pockets of Catholicism had followed King James into exile, and others, at least outwardly, conformed to Anglicanism, meaning fewer such Catholic communities actually had survived intact. But, on the other hand, coming to the later parts of this period, so coming to the half of the 18th century, the position had changed. In the newest study on the English Catholic community between 1688 and 1745, Gabriel Blickman noted that Catholics, especially those whose social position gave them access to the courtly centers of power and patronage, had played a very significant part actually in the 18th century England. They were not as marginal as one might think, and they were not as marginal as it is mostly known and stated in historiography. For example, Alexander Pope was not the only Catholic whose contributions, especially his essays on man, helped define the temper of an early English Enlightenment. In addition to Alexander Pope, as Blickman notes, a Catholic architect, James Gibbs, returned Baroque forms to the London skyline, as he says, and one Catholic composer, Thomas Arne, of course, probably the most famous Catholic of the 18th century, has composed Rule Britannia. There are other scholars, too, whose opinion is that Catholic position in England and the UK, already in that time it's already formed UK, had significantly changed as we come to the end of the 18th century. Nevertheless, our aim here was just to show you as brief or as scarce as possible the epoch in which our central figure had actually lived. Alban Butler was born in 1710 at Appletree, Northamptonshire, as the second son of Simon Butler, the Esquire. He has been orphaned at the age of 8, and he was sent to be educated son of King George II, for his devotion to the wounded English soldiers during the defeat at the Battle of Fontenoy. Alban Butler also served as tutor of George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, and his two brothers, James and Thomas Talbot, who had later become Catholic bishops. Butler at the end returned to England in 1749, when he had been appointed for some time as a missionary priest in Staffordshire. And he was eventually made chaplain to the Duke of Norfolk, whose nephew and heir, Edward Howard Butler, accompanied to Paris as his tutor. While he was in Paris, Butler completed his life. Alban Butler was finally appointed president of the English seminary at Saint-Omer in France, where he had remained till his death. During his term as president of the English seminary, Butler also served to the bishops of Arras, Saint-Omer, Ypres, and Boulogne-sur-Mer as their vicar general. Butler died in 1773 in Saint-Omer and has been buried in the parish church of Saint-Denis. We're here particularly interested in his most notable and prominent work, the already cited lives of the fathers, martyrs, and other principal saints, known in historiography and geography simply as Butler's Lives. This voluminous work is the result of a 30-year study, and it was first published in 4 volumes in London between 1756 and 1759. It is a very popular and compendious reproduction of the Bollandist Acta Sanctorum, exhibiting great industry and research, and in all respects the best compendium of Acta Sanctorum in English language. Butler's Opus Magnum has passed many editions and translations into French, German, Spanish, even Portuguese, etc. This edition was printed initially in 4 octavo volumes, with no stated publisher or author's name. However, they were so thick that they were usually bound in more volumes, and there were actually 6 title pages. I will not now mention each and every one of them. Each volume contains 3 months of the liturgical calendars and the lives of the saints. There are many useful and even extended notes in this first edition in the 18th century, but not to the extent that they appear in the second and succeeding editions. According to Charles Knight, the edition published in 12 volumes in 1847 is considered the best and most complete, as well as the one from 1866. Since Alban Butler published his original edition of Lives, and many successors have revised and updated his work. Herbert Thurston, for example, edited and significantly rewrote the work. His 12-volume revised edition was published between 1926 and 1938 by an English layman, actually, Donald Atwater, who had made further significant changes in the second edition, and then another one in 1956. There is also a modern, complete edition that started in 1995 and was finished around the year 2000, also in 12 volumes, organized by month and feast days. Of course, there are also many other versions. Under the month of September, naturally under the 24th of day, the Butler's Lives mentioned Saint Gerard of Chenaanel. This hagiographic work is not extensive at all. At first, we shall give just a brief overview of the sources, because at the beginning of the later editions, from 1866 onwards, there is a list of sources provided at the beginning of every life of every saint. According to them, we can say that Butler had used almost all of the most famous work of his time. We always have to be aware that it is most likely none of the Hungarian Austrian editions in Latin language of the period were easy to reach, so maybe he had just consulted the most important one. First source mentioned is Laurentius Surius, a German Carthusian monk and geographer, and his edition of Antonio Bonfini, which is used and noted as the first source. In that edition of Laurentius Surius, we can find also the life of Saint Gerard, but also the lives of other Hungarian saints, for example, Saint Emeritus, the son of Saint Stephen. We also have to say that Antonio Bonfini is not the best source for the period, since his work is dedicated mostly to the life of Matthias Corvinus, to the deeds of King Matthias Corvinus. On one side and on the other, he was the author who had lived 4 centuries after Saint Gerard of Chenaanel. Another important thing to mention is that Surius and his later 16th and 17th century editions have been firmly criticized already at the beginning of the 18th century. The following source is very interesting. It is stated that Butler had used the 9th volume of Claude Froly's Histoire Ecclésiastique, but the problem arises is in the editions of the aforementioned work, the said volume comprises only 7th and 8th century, so the period until the period of Charlemagne. Therefore, it is quite complicated to estimate which actual work and volume did Butler use for Saint Gerard's life. A voluminous work of Abbots Grouget, Mézengy, and Roussel of the Vie de Saint is also noted as used, but with very raw transcription, writing some Gouget mezengues are written sort of like Gauget mezengue, so it's very complicated to even estimate and establish what is the work about. The September volume, which is important for us, is of course compiled by Clotaire Gouget. The other two mentioned sources at the beginning of the life of Saint Gerard in Butler's work are the work of Johannes Schilting in September volume of the Acta Sanctorum. This classical Bollandist work has been briefly discussed last year on this very same occasion here in Timisoara. And one very interesting thing is the editors of Butler's life have stated that the life of Saint Gerard in the Acta Sanctorum starts with the page 713, so that it seems that Butler can use the whole life, including prologue and commentaries, and not only the Vita itself. As we have stated last year, the Vita itself is just another version of Legenda Minor or of Saint Gerard, and other parts, especially the prologue and the appendices, are much more interesting and much more valuable sources for the life of Saint Gerard. The other mentioned source is the Acta Sanctorum Ordini Sancti Benedicti in Seculorum Classes di Tributa, that is the work of famous Jean Mabillon, but it is also a version of Legenda Minor. So, the bottom line is that maybe different versions of Legenda Minor were the key source, but when it comes to the structure of the Butler's version of Saint Gerard's life, there are some slight differences. First of all, the introduction is quite short, and the life of Saint Gerard is given very, very briefly and scarcely, with only some key information. But at the very beginning, Butler knows that Gerard was a Venetian and born about the beginning of the 11th century. So he never actually states the tradition and legend that he is from a noble Sagredo family. The overview of his life is, as we stated, very short. And for us today, and considering the city we are here today in, it is very valuable to mention that Butler states that the good prince, he was considering Saint Stephen, nominated Saint Gerard to the episcopal see of Chona, he writes it with CH or CHZ, and a city which is 8 leagues from Timisoara. 8 leagues are actually some 44 or 45 kilometers, and as you know very well, Chona is a bit more distant, it's 70 some kilometers. But it is very interesting data that he provides here. The large part of this, as we call it in the final introduction, is dedicated to the life of this bishop, also to Gerard describing him as a pious man. He is stated to have converted many pagans and idolaters, with a remark by Butler that 2/3 of the inhabitants of the city of Chona were idolaters. Yet the saint, in less than a year, made them all Christians. Furthermore, we find out that he regulated everywhere all things that belonged to the divine service with the utmost care, and was solicitous that the least exterior ceremonies should be performed with great exactness and decency, and accompanied with a sincere spirit of religion. Butler's saying was, without a doubt, that through Gerard set us a good example of a bishop who cared about his people, and the example of our saint had a more powerful influence over the minds of the people than the most moving discourses, as Butler said. Of course, there is a standard hagiographical topos on Gerard, curing those with leper, carrying over the distress. After all-day labor, he had spent his nights in prayer and devotion. The larger part of the life, that is the last two quite extensive paragraphs, just to note that the other complete life of Saint Gerard was also given in just 2 shorter paragraphs, and this is the second 2 larger paragraphs, are dedicated to his martyrdom. What is also very interesting is that this part is mostly taken from the Legenda Minor, and it is dedicated, also the part dedicated to the martyrdom and death of Saint Gerard of Chena. Here, for instance, we have the introduction on the heirs of Saint Stephen, a part about Abba Samuel, who is declared as tyrant and evil man, and on the attempt of pagan restoration in Hungary after the death of its first Christian king, that is the uprising of Adi. Butler then writes on a mass celebrated by Gerard that he said that only the Bishop Beneta will survive the martyrdom, just as it is written in the Legenda Minor of Saint Gerard. The date of the martyrdom of Saint Gerard of Chena is accurate. It's 24 September 1046, as well as his posthumous destiny. Butler, leaning on sources well presents that Gerard has been sepultured in the cathedral of Chena's bishopric, canonized during the reign of Saint Ladislas, and then his relics have been transferred to Murano, which are well known and historically defined data. The end of this short but interesting piece of hagiographical work is dedicated to how a good pastor should act. It is therefore some kind of object lesson and an instruction to pastors to never refuse any labor. Labor is a word very, very often used by Alban Butler. Never to abandon any sinner, and to summarize, to live a as an acceptable characteristic for a pastor. As we can see, Alban Butler in the Lives of Saints had the key aim to represent Gerard as good Christian and devoted bishop, a truly saint man martyred by idolaters and pagans. Therefore, his martyrdom had the most significant place in the life of Saint Gerard. But the 18th century Butler showed quite good level of criticism, and he leaned on sources, which is very notable from the life itself. There are not many particularly large errors or mistakes, maybe except that distance between China and Timisoara, which is really not important, but mostly everything is in accordance with the known sources. Once again, in the frames of the period he had written, that is the period of the Enlightenment. During the ages and even centuries, there have been various editions of this principal work of Alban Butler. In the modern critical edition, there has been a very large step forward towards criticism, but the life itself is less more interesting for study. First, bibliography in the modern edition is more extensive and up to date, of course without Hungarian editions, and of course without any Hungarian literature. Furthermore, the life in that newest edition is much shorter, and it is actually not only a brief overview of his life from the birth until his martyrdom and death. Butler's Lives of Saints are very interesting reception of hagiography. To be completely honest, the 19th century versions, which are almost close to the original written by the author himself, are much more interesting to study. They represent a very valuable historical source depicting not only early modern and modern reception of one medieval Hungarian/Venetian saint among the English Catholics, which were at that time a very large minority population, but also are interesting as a stage in the development of medieval cult in modern times too. Mulțumesc frumos pentru atențiune dumneavoastră.
Thank you very much. Would you like to present your paper first?